Welcome back to Not Another Muslim Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mubarak Chaudhry. Today I have my other co-hosts, Shuyukh Ahsan, Qalam Khatib, and Ibrahim Javed. And today we have the pleasure to talk to Brother Omar Usman, who is the founding member of Qalam Institute, the famous Islamic Seminary based in Dallas, Texas, and also a founding member and current executive director of Muslim Matters, an online magazine based, or that began in 2007 as a collaboration between various scholars and bloggers to really talk about the issues surrounding Muslim Americans in the West. And today, we're going to be talking about something which I think is going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to be talking about his background for the most part, but also in addition to that, he just released a new book called The Fiqh of Social Media, which has really been an extension of a lot of what he's taught throughout the years by the same name, Fiqh of Social Media, across the nation for the most part. So with that, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Omar. How are you doing?
Walaikum salam. I'm doing good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, doing well. So I think first thing first, whenever we start this podcast, we have like an awkward sort of question. And it's always like who is said guest? And I feel like, I don't know, like we want to like get into the topic at hand, but it's good for like our audience to really understand who we're talking to. So I guess like number one, right? Who is Omar Usman? Outside of that bio I just gave you.
So, I mean, full-time, I work as a technology consultant, married with 4 kids. That's, probably like 95% of my life. And then, on the other kind of on the side, I do work with Muslim Matters, Qalam, Productive Muslim, doing just more targeted, it sounds like a lot, but it's just more targeted programs, such as like the Productive Muslim Book Club, and then my own little podcast, YouTube writing on the side. So that's kind of what I try to do. That's my hobby, I guess you could say, what I try to do on the side. But for the most part, really, it's work and family is the bulk of it.
Would you consider yourself like I guess like outside of like work and family, would you consider yourself as a like a community worker? Is that like
sorry, say that one more time?
Would you consider yourself as a community worker? Is that like a label you'd like to put yourself in?
I guess in a sense, well, prior to the pandemic, yeah, I was a regular khatib in the area. So that was my primary community work. But in terms of actual local events like Masjid Board and things like that, I think it's safe to say I've retired from most of that type of thing.
Oh, okay. Do you find yourself, I guess like before that, what is like, I guess like the main sort of like interest or sort of like catalyst for you getting into like the work that you do? I like to think that a Muslim community work for the most part, even like to the extent of just like doing like khutbah, is something that like the minority of Muslims like naturally do. And I think a lot of people have like a different sort of reason of why they do it. And for you, I wanted to ask, I guess, like before we like get into everything, like what is like the main sort of reason of why you got into the work for as long as you have, right? I know for the most part, like not everyone like does a level of community work, either being involved in an organization or doing khutbah or doing whatever, right? For too long. Like it's something that they do when they're young for the most part. But with someone with like, with kids and a wife and like also like working full time, like what has kept you going? Why, what started the interest in the first place for the most part?
So, I mean, I've grown up in an environment where that was very much normal, right? So my dad, for example, he worked full time. He had, before we called it a side hustle, he had his own side hustles, for as long as I can remember. And he also was always active in the masjid. So he's been masjid president, masjid board member, secretary, treasurer, you name it, he did it. And so growing up, I just by extension, I've sat in on masjid construction board meetings when I was like 12. I've sat and had to empty out the zakat boxes and sadaqah boxes and count the money with him. He's always pushed me into doing those things. And so I would say it's almost been like a natural inclination that, okay, I need to have some type of community work that I do. I think one thing that I figured out early on was like, okay, alhamdulillah, I have some, part of my strength zone is, let's say, speaking or writing. And so I started targeting myself in that direction. And then it's just one of those things that once you start doing it, it becomes easier to do it and people recognize that, and you kind of, go down that way.
Yeah. So going off of that, like just if you could touch a bit about like how your professional background in IT, and I know you mentioned you had a major in CS, I believe, right, in college.
Yeah, computer science.
Yeah, I read that in the book. Like how is that professional background as well in IT and like your community work with like Muslim Matters, Qalam Institute, like how has that professional background enabled your community work? And also like how generally would you say your experience has been thus far?
I would say it helped in the sense that so I would say two things. So one is having kind of a technology inclination for a long time. So most of what my professional background hasn't been the traditional coding and database and that type of thing. Most of my corporate work has been on the business side, where more often than not, I am the tech person in a non-technology environment. So whether that's in the healthcare field, where I'm representing IT with physicians and hospital executives and pharmacists, or in my current role, I work in human resources and I work primarily with learning teams and people who are designing curriculums and teaching classes and things like that. When it came to community work, it was almost analogous in the sense that I'm representing the guy that understands the technology side of it with people who have a different skill set. So it's with people, let's say, who are Islamic scholars, where, okay, that's obviously their skill set is they know how to do tafsir of the Quran. They know how to teach the seerah. They know how to do hadith studies. They know how to do all those things. But we don't expect them to be experts on how to build a website and set up a podcast and do marketing and all those types of things. And so I think initially it was bringing that perspective to some of that Islamic work. The other part of it, I would say, is when it comes to maybe organizational development, in the sense, and this might be a whole side tangent, but there is, and I'm choosing my words carefully, there is an element of professionalism and operations and thoroughness that you pick up in a good corporate culture that is sometimes needed in Islamic organizations.
And I feel like going off of that, something someone recently told me was, and maybe you have a better answer to this question because I didn't. They said, why don't the people who contribute to masjids, like board members, who are like excellent in their field, bring that same energy to the boards that they're on? Like, would you say that's a fair characterization that they don't?
I would say there's a bit of a leap in logic here. So that's why I'm trying to be very careful. Not, there's always people who say, well, we should run our masjids like a corporation.
Yeah.
And I very much think you shouldn't, because a masjid is a non-profit organization. It just by definition cannot function the same way that a corporation does, because the entire incentive structure is completely different. And so you can't bring that same mentality into community work. The other part of it is the false perception that if I'm good at one thing, I'll be good at something else. And so I might be very good at project management and technology and things like that, but that doesn't necessarily translate into me being good at those things in a masjid environment. Look, take very simply the idea of project management. Anyone who's done project management in a corporate environment knows that one of the key things is managing resources. You have to leverage other teams. You have to get people who aren't on your team to do work on your behalf, right? So if my learning team, for example, or my nursing team needs something done with an Oracle server, I have to get the Oracle guys to come and do work for our team. I have to negotiate, I have to leverage, I have to do certain things to get them to do things for us. Now, in the corporate world, there's incentives because there's management structures, there's pay structures, there's all types of recourse that will allow you to get that buy-in, even if the person doesn't want to do it. That does not translate into the same type of leadership in a nonprofit environment, because now you're dealing with volunteers who don't have the same accountability and incentive structure in place. And so just because I'm good at managing projects in the corporate world does not mean I'm going to suddenly be able to do those same things in a nonprofit environment.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think for the most part, like I would agree with you when it comes to, I guess, not sort of bringing in business frameworks or sort of like the understanding of like running a masjid like a business into nonprofits. But at what point, like, can we still like streamline sort of needs and sort of like, I guess, processes into nonprofit work without like adding in like elements that exist within like current.
Yeah. So that's I think like kind of the line that you have to toe, which is what are the good practices you can borrow and implement. And I think there is a lot in terms of efficiencies and streamlining. I mean, if we just take, for example, how mushed finances are managed, like some mushes don't even have QuickBooks yet. You know, like some places still struggle to get tax receipts out on time. So there's a lot of things like that where, maybe you do bring in a hotshot accountant and just be like, hey, fix this for us. But I would say that in general, it's more skills based. But in where I would say the difference lies is more at the higher level where we're talking about the overarching mission, vision, culture of the organization. That needs to be driven more by someone that has an Islamic background as well as some type of actual nonprofit training.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So I agree, and I somewhat disagree, because like for the most part, like I just don't know if we've been able to see like a nonprofit that's utilized it's like appropriate business or corporate frameworks. Even though like obviously you've had like Mushid board members that have like a level of like corporate background. Because like I don't know about you, and I don't know if like how transparent we're gonna be on this podcast, but like for me at least, and like I know we've talked about this for the most part, like I'm like pretty jaded when it comes to how masjids are operating currently and whether or not like they're even like meant to be sustained for the most part as like our primary spiritual avenues. And I think that really has to do with how they're organized for the most part. And I'm not trying to say like we need to like fully like corporatize them. That's not the case. But yeah, I do think that they need to be like certain process needs to be streamlined for the fact that like most massages don't have something like QuickBooks. Yeah, for sure. But that's not like I don't think that's like the number one issue. Like adopting certain like business frameworks or like business practices. For the most part, right? Like I think the number one thing, and we'll wrap this up soon because I really want to get to your book. The number one thing that I see, at least within my life versus my career and like the Muslim spaces or organizational spaces that I work in, is that for the most part, most people have like a level of ownership whenever they're in their work, right? Like when they're doing their career work, like you can see that like they have a level of ownership in what they're doing, because there's obviously a level of material stake in what they're doing. But like in Muslim work for some reason, and maybe this is just like my experience, sometimes for like a lot of people, and even like myself in like certain instances, I don't have that same level of ownership sometimes. And I think like that issue is significantly more fundamental than like talking about like certain like frameworks or processes to like really streamline. And I don't know if like you've had like a similar experience or if you like have seen like something similar, but I've just noticed that some people just may not like take Muslim work as seriously as they need to, if that makes sense.
I would say that to me is a problem across the board. If you talk to any small business owner, they'll have the same complaint that they're more invested in their business than their employees because their employees don't take it seriously.
Yeah, that's right.
I think in a nonprofit, it's going to be similar. The person who started the organization is going to be more emotionally invested in it than the volunteer that comes through. And I think to me, this is almost a leadership issue more than necessarily corporate or nonprofit type of thing, where the person that does have the ownership and is invested needs to find ways to empower people and make them invested in the project somehow. And also realistically recognizing that not everyone's going to buy in at the same level. But it's how do you create some type of culture where it's sustainable, and also maybe just realizing like, hey, Mubarak's going to come in and, Mubarak wants to become a CPA. So he wants to come in and really like fix our accounting process for 2 years. And then he's going to move on. Okay, cool. I should be able to recognize that, have you come in, bring that to the table, while realizing you're not going to care about the organization as much as I am. but at least for the 2 years that you're there, you're bought in for whatever that period is.
That makes sense. And so kind of like now transitioning into your amazing book, mashallah. I just want to kind of start from there and say, what kind of sparked the development of the original 40 hadith on social media, and what aspects did you use from that to help in the development of your new book?
Yeah, because I think I
Or should we actually first also mention like the new book itself for the people that don't know?
Because for the most part, I think I was introduced to you when I first like signed up for your newsletter like years ago. That you had like the 40 hadith social media collection, and then I know like from Qalam for the most part that you always taught that yearly, and I just like saw that, and then like we even invited you a couple years ago at the MSA. So that was like the original sort of project when it comes to like fiqh social media. So like we'd love to talk like about like how that like where that developed. How it like basically turned into the book that you have right now, and then talk about like the project in of itself.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what sparked just the fiqh of social media, but I think it was the culmination of just noticing a lot of things, right? So for example, with Muslim Matters years ago, when comment section was an actual thing, right, was just the types of things people said, the types of things that they did. And then also there was just a lot of, if we're cycling back, because it's only been like 5-6 years, but a lot has happened in 5-6 years. But if you cycle back to that time, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but there were, because everything was so new, there were so many conversations in the community around, is Facebook halal, is Facebook haram?
Wait, that was an actual conversation.
Oh yeah, that was like
definitely haram, right?
You might be a bit too young for that because I don't remember. Facebook dropped, I got on. Like there was no question of like it being halal or haram for me.
No, so it was like, are these things halal or haram? The way that people are talking and chatting and this and that. Like there was a lot of angst and unknown with these platforms, and so my thing was always I would get frustrated because I'm like, okay, I understand why the question's being asked, but I still think it's the wrong question. Because whether Facebook is you could have Mufti Mink come out and give a whole khutbah saying Facebook is haram, but no one's going to listen because they're going to continue using it regardless. So to me, it was always a practicality issue of like, okay, people are using these things. Why don't we figure out a better way of doing it? And then there was so much with internet culture being new, where people had online lives versus their offline lives. Now I think it's much more merged, but before there was a clear demarcation between the two. And it was just noticing a lot of those types of interactions, just the way that people were talking, the way that people were discussing Islamic issues was so drastically different online versus in person. And for me, I'm always curious about the question as to why are people acting a certain way, right? Whether it's the masjid, whether it's social media, it's like what's actually driving that particular behavior.
So I want to understand like the differences particularly. So was it as like were you just noticing particularly different behaviors as just like I guess like different behaviors between like an online person and offline person, or was it like in reference to like a level of spirituality? Because like me when I read the book, the way the perspective that I like read it was in reference to like how one would read like a general book of tazkiyah, right? But in the context of like social media, which I think we've needed for a long time for the most part. Is it meant to be something of which one could understand and navigate their own like spiritual development through like using social media, or is it something a little bit more than that?
It's meant to be more general in the sense that this is a new realm, right? Like, and if we step back for a second, think about how new things are. So again, in the past 5 years, we've had people. I remember giving a talk one time, and a mother and her like 15-year-old daughter came to me. They're like, "Oh, my daughter's always on her phone, this and that." And I was like, "Oh, what are you doing? Just texting your friends?" And she's like, "No." And I'm like, "Oh, you're not texting?" I'm like, "Okay, are you on Facebook?" And she was like, "No." And I'm like, and in my mind, those were the two ways that you primarily communicated with people. And I was like, so what are you doing on your phone all night that is causing a problem in your household? And she's like, Snapchat. And I was like, Oh, like I knew what it was, but I didn't realize like how it was being utilized, right? I didn't realize that this was how they were communicating with one another instead, replacing text messaging and so on.
Now it's like
So,
TikTok instead of Snapchat, but
huh?
now it's like TikTok instead of Snapchat.
Now it's TikTok, and then now it's Clubhouse, and all these other things, right? So it's meant to be just a general sense of understanding the harms and understanding the issues that arise as you interact on these platforms. And just giving yourself, action items, giving yourself a plan to revisit as to how to just manage your own interaction with it. Because if you're not intentional with the usage, the negative effects by default will take over.
Yeah. And something I really liked, like before we get into like specific details, something I really liked overall was you're not saying like whether the thing itself is good or not. You're saying how to use it, and it's kind of like you can kind of put that for everything else in life. It's not about whether the thing is like good or bad. Is Twitter good or bad? Facebook good or bad? It's how are you using it.
All of them are tools.
Exactly.
And by the way, it's the same thing. Like going back as long as anyone can remember, when the printing press was invented, people had a heart attack saying like, oh my God, now people are going to get dumber. They're not going to remember things. Their memories are going to weaken because now they'll have everything available on paper. When I was growing up, it was the whole couch potato thing. Like, oh, your kids are going to turn into couch potatoes. They watch TV all day. Now it's video games and social media. So all of these things, really, they're just tools. And even with social media, I had to try really hard not to make it specific to any platform because the platforms are going to come and go. The way that, look, everyone has a Facebook account, but the way that we use it right now is much different from a few years ago. Like when my memories pop up from like 4 or 5 years ago, it's really funny because I'm like, wow, I used to check in and tag people on Facebook and I used to post photos on Facebook. Now I don't do any of those things, right? And so the platforms are always going to change.
Yeah.
I think like going off of like the framework you developed, like the 40 Hadith, you spent the past 5 years traveling and doing seminars like all around like America. Like how has that been? Because I feel like someone who's traveled and gotten to know these different communities, like that gives you a perspective that's very rich in that, people kind of think all of the communities are the same here in America, and it's probably not true to an extent.
No, not at all.
So how would you say that kind of shaped your thought process? And also, if you can remember, what's the most common question you got about navigating social media as a Muslim?
The most, you'll be like, I'll share a couple of things. So the most common complaint that I got, and this was multiple places, and this one really made me sad. And it was that it was either my husband or my dad. It was always the man of the house in this situation. Comes home, sits down on the couch, and uses WhatsApp all night. I had multiple sisters approach me with the same issue, saying, essentially, I know he's worked really hard all day. I want to be accommodating. I'm not trying to like nag or this or that, but he's just sitting there, not available. No one can talk to him. No one can do anything. He's just talking to his friends, forwarding videos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I gave a talk at an MSA and I had a kid who, I say kid, he was like 19, but he said he's literally feels like he's raising his 11-year-old younger brother because of literally the exact same situation that my dad comes home, sits on the couch on WhatsApp, and no one can talk to him. He's physically there, mentally, emotionally absent. That really was the most common complaint. It wasn't really like, oh, my kid is using their iPad too much. What do I do? Like, most parents know how to figure that stuff out. That's really not it's challenging, yes, but it's not, as if you don't know how to handle your own kids. But dealing with your parents or something like that, that's much different. That's much more challenging.
Do you think that's an issue specific to, I guess, like social media or like increased phone or just like the availability of like, a smartphone? Or is that, or has it been just exasperated by social media or a smartphone? Or is it like an entirely separate issue? Like, is there something more fundamental to that?
I think social media is the magnifying lens. I think it takes everything and multiplies it by 100, right? So if you take the stereotype from, let's say, the 80s or 90s, the stereotype would have been the guy is always out with his friends. So it's bowling night or it's basketball night or it's poker night. And so, 3 or 4 nights a week is always something and he's never home. But that was still limited to, certain outings or certain nights of the week. Now the stereotype is literally 6 p.m. to midnight. every night.
I think I know Sheikh Mikhail gave a review on your book, and I'm sure he talked to you about it. But do you think like you mentioned that it's social media is like an amplifier? So if you're already not a mindful person, it only makes you even more or even less mindful. Is that like a fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, the phone and these apps are designed in such a way that if you're not intentionally paying attention to how you do it, it will take over. Like there is an infinite amount of things to grab your attention and let you mindlessly do things, right? Like even recently I saw that, Netflix shows now some of them are being produced with the intent of being ambient shows, where essentially it's not like an intense plot line that you're sitting and like watching episode after episode, but they're made with the intent that you put it on in the background while you're doing something else.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I can't do that. People do that?
That's like mindless watching.
I do that. Like I literally not gonna lie. Sometimes I like put up this.
You have been fooled by the system.
I just realized like they're actually making like TV shows like
it's
that.
It's an intentional effort.
Totally duped in because I put on The Office on Netflix. I'm just like getting work done. It's like white noise.
Yeah. I think Emily in Paris was an example of one of those shows.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, I feel like I do the same with sports. Like sometimes I'll have a game on. Like I'm not really a fan of the team, but I just have it on just to have on. That's interesting. But it's also like regarding the book. So mashallah, you hit on a lot of like great topics, and there's one that me and Abe really like. But before we get into that one, which topic did you have to like do some like serious research while you were writing the book?
I would say the part that I probably spent the most amount of time like thinking about or researching probably had to do with things like dawah. Like what does online dawah look like? How, and dawah is a broad term, but I would say it's maybe almost more specific to the idea of, can you put Islamic material out online that's effective in the sense, multiple questions. Does it educate people? Does it enrich them spiritually? Does it contribute to meaningful change? Can we actually have conversations online that change people's minds? Make them change their viewpoints, make them adopt a better viewpoint. So a lot of things under that umbrella, I would say, was probably the most time consuming for me.
Yeah. And you mentioned about view. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mubarak.
How did you go about researching that specifically? Because I imagine like it's a very difficult way of getting data points to like validate a certain conclusion.
It was broad and honestly, I would say a lot of it was observational. A lot of it was just, I think it was like 6-7 years ago, I made a video called Shame Grenades, which went like not viral, really? Muslim viral, right? Like in our tiny niche circles, it went viral.
What was it about?
Huh?
Oh, are you about to? Never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the idea was essentially the whole thing where you see people saying like make dua for Palestine, and someone's like, well, what about Kashmir? And it's like your compassion is not zero sum. It's not as if you only have like 100 duas to make and you just burned one on Palestine. Like I would be like, that's not how you know how to think about it. You can care about multiple things at one time, but it was a very common way of talking about Islamic subjects. Like, and it was like clockwork. Every Super Bowl, astaghfirullah, people should be reading the Quran instead. And I was just kind of like, what is this accomplishing? And now we have language. Again, that's how much these things have evolved in such a short amount of time. Now we have language for that. Now we can call it virtue signaling. Now we can call it all these other things. But we've seen a lot of these behaviors without necessarily having labels on them. But a lot of it has been also like, why are certain Islamic personalities popular? Why are some not? Why is a certain organization getting traction online? Why is another one not getting traction? Why is it that when this person talks about Tawbah and patience and things like that they go viral, but these other 100 people talk about the importance of repentance and no one cares? And so just a lot of just looking at those types of things, I think, helped to inform some of what I was trying to look at.
When it comes to dawah particularly, I guess like what do you think like is like I guess like what's your ultimate opinion when it comes to dawah online? For the most part, this is something I've personally struggled with, and not like, I guess like as someone that is like, I don't consider myself a da'i in any sort of way, but like someone that engages in actually doing like the dawah work. because my inevitable conclusion when it comes to doing da'wah work online is that it just seems like a little insincere for me, right? Just putting myself out there. But obviously, right, like there's clear sort of like tangible benefits from the sheer fact that there's some people that are able to access a level of Islam online that they wouldn't otherwise. But I want to know your thoughts on, like, I guess, like how you perceive da'wah work online.
I think it requires a heavy amount of caution. And I think that a lot of it, and I know people aren't going to want to hear this, and I know it sounds ironic coming from someone that has like a podcast and writes online. I think a lot of it is overrated, if I'm being just completely blunt about it.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it ends up being, how do I pick my words? I'll be kind of transparent here. A lot of it is an inflated an inflated sense of self-importance as opposed to dawah.
You even mentioned in the book like how much offline dawah are you doing compared to online?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and I think the litmus test really is how much your online is complemented by offline. One thing that I try to keep as an analogy in my mind is when we do khatib training, Sheikh Abdul Nasser always says that your microphone time has to be multiplied by 10 privately. So whatever your public output is on a mic, like speaking to people, you need to multiply that in private with things that no one knows about. Because otherwise the mic is it can delude you very quickly, right? And so I think with online, it's the same thing, is that how much are you complementing offline? And I think a lot of the pitfalls we see with online dawah would be remedied if those people had offline complement, right? And so just a very simple thing, you see some people building these gigantic platforms online where they're tearing people down or, being vitriolic or attacking and this and that. And this is kind of like, dude, you can't even give khutbah in a city that's starving for khatibs. Like the city that you live in can't find enough people to give Jummah khutbah, and you're nowhere to be seen. Like there's a very big problem if you're very well known online, but no one in your community knows who you are.
Yeah. But what about people that do like YouTube videos of them giving dawah? Is that offline or online? Or both?
That's online.
Even if they're out in the street.
Documenting their own like dawah.
Yeah, like it's like how people like make those videos are out on the street and like they grab people like, hey, outrageous question.
Like in England kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm not trying to like mention specific people, but
I mean nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, nothing wrong. But that's
if it works, it works. It's just not personally. It's just not my thing.
Yeah,
I don't really watch a lot of those videos. So
yeah.
I used to have like a moment in my life where I would watch like dawah man, not like as like a personal interest. I just really want to understand like the Salafi dawah scene in the UK, and then like watch FouseyTube like all on the same day, just to understand like the opposite sides of the spectrum sometimes. And it's just what's online when it comes to Islam is very, very interesting. But I wanted to ask about this specifically. I guess when it comes to figures that obviously have built a level of online presence, and I don't want to use this podcast to really like put like particular names out there, but I mean for the most part, I'm being real. I imagine like there's a particular name that we're all thinking about. At what point, and this might be like something like out of any of our purviews to really answer, because like for the book as a whole, you give certain like frameworks and outlines to like navigate social media. And action items like to really like do like have like a practical level of like navigating social media, right? But when things go a little too far, let's say either for a peer or even for like known figures that's on like Muslim Twitter or Muslim online, like the Muslim online space, like what can we do collectively to like I guess like check some people? Because for me at least, like and I'll like make this a little personal. And maybe this is like something I have to like reflect on my own as well, but like there's a level of I guess like jadedness I also have when it comes to Muslim online seas as well. Like for Twitter at least, I like made like a separate list for Muslim Twitter of all the people that's like associated with Muslim Twitter, so that I can just like swipe left when I just don't want to like involve myself in Muslim Twitter for a bit, right? But like that's like something like obviously like I can do personally, but there's a clear like figures that's not necessarily putting out the most beneficial things on the online scene that I feel like we kind of just like leave. You know what I mean?
So this is gonna date me a little bit, and you guys might be a little too young to catch the reference here. But Howard Stern's radio show used to be very popular, not because everyone that listened to him liked what he had to say, but because they were waiting to see what he was going to say next. That was just inflammatory or going to enrage people, right? It's the same idea as you
Stephen
have
A.
to look at
Smith.
the car wreck when you drive by.
Yeah.
So what were you saying?
Like Stephen A. Smith, kind of.
I like Stephen A. Smith. He's not inflammatory.
I do. Sometimes.
He's informed. He's a good journalist. I don't mind him. But there is an element of in an online world, attention is rewarded. And so the person that gets the most attention is going to get, they're going to be incentivized to keep doing the things that give them attention. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to personalities like this, my personal take, and I've said this to a lot of people, and it's just, they can't turn away, is you have to starve them of oxygen. Once people stop reading, stop liking, stop sharing their content, they will stop behaving that way. The problem is that they post something inflammatory and everyone goes, oh my God, look what this person said. It's so offensive. Yeah. And they disagree with it, but they're still sharing it. They're still contributing to the views. They're still contributing to the likes. They're still contributing to the traffic. If you really want that person's behavior to change, you have to change the incentive structure. And I tell people, like, look, if that person is so problematic, why have you not blocked them? And that's literally what I do. I just block them. I don't want to give them a single extra view if they are like that. Now that's one extreme. I would say the other thing is and that's maybe more of an exception. I would say that for most people, they're fairly reasonable. And if they have people in their lives that will talk to them, then they're going to be willing to listen. I had a sheikh reach out to me and say, hey, can you talk to this person because their online behavior is whatever, right? Like, it's not necessarily bad, but they're worried about the path that it could go down. I'm like, okay, have a conversation with that person, and that person being like, oh, like, I didn't think about it that way, and reflecting and taking action like that. And I would say that's most people. Like, if you talk to them properly, they'll change things up. And I would say at an individual level, it's important to, if you don't have that, seek it out. You know what I mean? So look, there have been times where, yeah, we all feel like just ranting and blowing up online at someone that's just being super ridiculous. And I kid you not, I've had times where I text a Sheikh of the Nasr and I'm like, can I please post this? And you just be like, it's not worth it. I'll be like, okay, I'm not going to post it. There'll be other times where I'm looking at something like, should I post this? I'll show it to my wife. I'm like, hey, should I post this? She'd be like, that's stupid. I'll be like, okay, good. I'm glad you told me. Then I delete it before it goes up, but I would say kind of at the individual level, seek out some type of shura, have people that can hold you in check. And then on the other side, when people are getting to the extremes that you've described, I think the collective action has to be boycott them and shut them out. Because once they lose the views and the likes and the reshares, they're going to have to change their behavior. But as long as people keep sharing it, whether they agree with it or not, they're helping that person build a platform.
Yeah. And I think for the most part, like, as an individual, like, I would do the exact sort of action that you described. But then it seems as though that, like, certain individuals still are able to, like, accumulate a base for themselves, and they just keep going. Like, for example, like the Howard Stern show is still going.
Yeah, but it's not as big. It's not as big, right?
It's like a plateau, you're saying?
And the other thing is that's kind of an exception. I would say if we go back and look at, let's say we took a 20-year snapshot of Islam on the internet, right? So in the early 2000s, I remember people had there were certain online personalities that were huge. Like they were on Napster and LimeWire. Like that's how big they were. But people were like pirating their MP3s of their talks.
Those are platforms that I've not heard in a while.
Napster.
So Real Audio, that's one you probably definitely haven't heard. But we didn't have YouTube, but there were these types of things. People were sharing CDs of certain speakers and this and that. And I think if you look at that snapshot of websites that were active or even organizations that were active, there's, when we talk about Allah putting barakah in something, part of barakah isn't just that the blessing is multiplied. One part of barakah also is lasting power, right? Just the longevity of something is barakah. And when you look at these personalities, like, right now it might feel like someone is at their peak. And so it feels like we have to constantly deal with them. For me, I take the long view and just think like, okay, but in 3-4 years, that person's going to fizzle out. Because ultimately, when you're selling a train wreck, everyone's going to stop and stare for a while. But, after a couple of years, people are going to realize looking at train wrecks all the time isn't helping me much. And they're going to move on.
That's really interesting. And looking at like that 20-year snapshot of like the Muslim community, I think like there's that one phase where YouTube was very big, right? With even Sheikh Abdul Nasser, right? I remember talking to him about this specifically because I was like, do you have some sort of like game plan for shifting into this new age? Because the work you did on YouTube is the reason people like me are, sitting here in this masjid talking to you, because we saw your videos addressing almost any topic you want. You just Google it, it'll be there, right? And it's not like there's not many videos left to make necessarily, but there's new platforms to use. And so like that was something I asked him. And as someone who obviously works with him, and how his stance is on social media, like how does that, like for Qalam at least, or just Islamic videos, like what's like the next, you think, like phase of getting to kids like that are in high school now, maybe?
I think it's kind of the same thing, right? So if we use Sheikh Abdul Nasser as an example, he's got his videos online, he's got his podcast and stuff, which, even the podcast that he does, really, it's an extension of a masjid halaqah. Mm-hmm. It's a weekly class until the pandemic, but it was a weekly masjid class that was being podcasted. And then even then, yes, there's the stuff online, but really 90% of what he does is in a classroom with students. That the bulk of the work is not really seen by everybody. And I would say that that's true in a lot of places. And so even when it comes to things like reaching the youth or the high school and stuff, I don't think that element changes, right? My oldest is, I'm really old. He's turning 15, inshallah, right? So he's right at that age. And he doesn't care about any of these, he doesn't watch Islamic videos online by any stretch, right? His Islamic experience is going to come through the families that we associate with. It's going to come through the masjid that we attend and what he hears at that masjid, or where we go to pray Friday prayer, right? Like those are the things that are going to have the most effect on him, not necessarily what's online. Because even the stuff that's online, although it's ubiquitous, you still have to go looking for it. Because if you're not interested in it, it's not going to just come smack you in the face. You have to go looking for it. And even that initial spark has to be cultivated much more strongly at a local level.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah. And something also, I had a question from the book. Was there like a specific topic that like kind of changed, like as you were researching it, it completely like flipped how you used to think about it and how you think about it now? Like how you thought about it coming into the topic and then how you thought about it coming out of it after doing the research?
I think the one thing that I got maybe a lot of clarity on was around, I'll say, use the broad umbrella of envy, but just the clarity of, how people portray success versus real life. I would say that was probably like a big one, because everyone portrays a certain image online, and you can intellectually understand that everyone's posting a highlight reel. You can know that fact, but it doesn't change the fact that in your heart is still, when you're going through a tough time personally, it can become difficult to see all that online.
So I had a question, and I think I know your answer, but people who haven't read will probably not see it. But would you say that the ability to sit through boredom is a skill that digital natives which are people who are born like in this new era of technology, can't remember like the life without phones. Like, do you think that's a skill they
Yeah,
no longer
absolutely.
have?
Like, I think being bored is very important. Like,
Mhm.
being able to give your mind a break is very important. And in the book, I talk about there's a direct cost to not being bored, which is you don't have time to think. You don't have time to reflect. You don't have time to make dua. There's a very popular thing on Reddit called shower thoughts, where people have these profound realizations while they're taking a shower. And it's not the idea of taking a shower. It's really more that's the only 10 minutes of your day that you're not on a screen. And then suddenly your mind is working in overdrive, thinking about all types of stuff. And so that the idea of it's not so much as being bored. It's you also have to give your mind a break. Just like you take rest days from exercising, your mind needs downtime to process things and make sense of things and make connections and all those it just needs downtime to rest.
Yeah. And there's also spiritual ramifications too. Like I attended a talk by Sheikh Mikhail, and he mentioned like sometimes it's in those times that you can make some extra dhikr, extra dua, and just kind of like you said, like reflect on about your life or certain situations. And so when you don't have that, it can impact you spiritually in the long run.
Yeah, and that's a point that Brother Omar makes in his book is that like the direct ramification of not having downtime is that you lose your dua. Like I believe that was like a point you made.
I want to talk about, or at least ask the question, for any I guess like listener that is listening right now, that hasn't read the book yet. But what are some like practical ways to get to a point to where you are unplugging and like I guess like actively trying to be bored? What are some things that has worked for you to be able to like really build that as a regular habitual thing?
So I would say for me, the one thing that's worked the best for me is unfollowing. Like you talked about Muslim Twitter.
Yeah.
I hate to say I've unfollowed so many Muslim personalities or muted them or whatever, because they're people that I respect and I think that we have a lot to learn from them, but they keep just talking about arguing about the same old things over and over. I'm just like I just don't care anymore, right? And I'm not learning anymore. Now it's just impacting me negatively. I'm going down these rabbit holes on issues that have no bearing on my daily life. And so unfollowing has been a big one.
Actually, and like just thinking about myself right now, I did that. I've done that recently when it comes to like Muslim Twitter, but like I kind of went back. Mufti Mek Mashallah like posted a live the other day, and I don't want to like use the podcast to like talk about like the specific issue he was talking about, but I found myself like spending like almost 2 hours like going into like the massive issue he was talking about a couple of days ago, and like thinking back now, like I could have saved like 2 hours yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, mentioning unfollowing, one thing that I have to credit you for. So Jazakallah khair. Back when you came to our MSA, you gave this talk about fiqh of social media. Yeah. The first thing I did right when I got to back to my dorm, I got my phone and I muted and unfollowed all the girls on my Instagram. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever done. Because like you mentioned, like there's sometimes there's things you shouldn't be seeing. And like it's not about what they're posting, it's about like what you're consuming. And so to this day, I like credit you for that. I mean, I sat there, I was like, man, this is taking way longer than it should. To like go to every person and mute. I was like, afterwards, I felt so great. I was like, this is amazing. Now my feed is like less, and it only see the things I need to be seeing.
Yeah, I said most of my feed now is cooking and sports.
And little sneakers, right? It has to be little sneakers in there.
Actually, most of my Instagram is probably sneakers, if I'm being honest.
You're following that sneaker account.
Yeah. I follow too many sneaker accounts.
Yeah. But to this day, I still think about that. Like, man, Omar Usman.
You and Khalid have too much in common. You're gonna have to
do like a post call. The specific thing that Khaled's talking about is actually something that we've talked about, like with MSA Brothers particularly, because at least like as like people our age, we have this like weird sort of understanding that when someone follows you on like Instagram or like Twitter or something, and you know them in real life, like
oh no,
it's like to follow them back,
dude. Oh man.
And I actually like did like a public post about this. Is that like if you're a girl, because like I'm engaged, alhamdulillah now. Khaled's married, mashallah. Abe, make dua for him. Shafaat, but the number one thing that like Khalid and I like at least like figured out after you did that talk was that like the habitual thing now is that like if a woman does like follow us, yeah, we'll follow back, but like we'll instantly mute to like somewhat like preserve that level of like etiquette that apparently has been ingrained in us, but still like
someone gave me, I think it was Mufti Kamani. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the advice stuck with me was keep it. What was it? Keep it public and keep it professional.
PPPP.
Keep it public and keep it fresh. So basically the rule that I follow is anything and everything will be screenshotted. So proceed accordingly. Yeah. And I think that's, we don't even have to go into much more detail on that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anything and everything will be screenshotted. Proceed with caution.
Yeah.
It is interesting, like even like with people, especially like guys our age that obviously like were born with a phone in their hand. If you talk about them, they'll understand that, they'll know that, they realize that. But we still have like instances even within the Muslim community where like clearly like someone forgot that like everything and anything can become screenshotted.
Yeah.
And also, doesn't that kind of give rise to, maybe you can speak on it more, doesn't that give rise to a sincerity crisis, in that I'm more worried about being exposed than I am upholding the best like character? Like that's just something I struggle with myself, because I think the reality is true that everything can be screenshotted, but how do I make it more about like just be doing the right thing as opposed to doing the safe thing? Maybe.
Can you give an example?
Like I don't know, honestly, like I'm interacting with someone online, right? And maybe I withhold language that I would otherwise use, like maybe curse words or something like that. But instead of like, I don't want to put it online because maybe someone will see that and have a bad perception of me. But in reality, behind the scenes, that's something that I actually use in my daily life. It's a bad example, but it's just something.
Yeah,
so I think in the case where it's forcing you to behave a little bit better, that might be a good thing. Mm-hmm. Even if you feel that it's a bit insincere, I would rather be insincere and, not liable than sincerely representing something that is clearly problematic.
Yeah, that makes sense, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm probably thinking too much into it. But also, there's another point that I wanted to ask about, although these are really good points. So echo chambers, like in my opinion, I think Khalid agrees with me. Mm-hmm. I think that's the most difficult, or that's the most difficult pair of action items in your book, from my opinion.
It's hard to control.
Say again?
It's hard to control. Like,
it's subjective. It requires maturity, like self-awareness. So how optimistic are you that people like ourselves who read your book will be able to develop that maturity and awareness to actually understand they have an echo chamber, number one, and then number two, like use those remedies you gave in terms of talking to people with different perspectives and kind of managing our content intake? Like, how optimistic are you?
This is probably the toughest one, to be fair, right? Because the entire realm of information literacy is so new, because we've never had this much information thrown at us. We've never had this much conflicting information thrown at us. And it's very difficult to navigate because it's not as easy as, let me just read both sides of an issue and figure out what's correct. It's, do you even know that who you're getting info from is reputable? Is it even a real source? How much effort are you supposed to dedicate to this and on how many topics? So that's, I think, very difficult. The point that I'm hoping that people get is, one is just simply recognize it and understand it. And I think politically, we probably is a good example of, I interviewed these guys that wrote this book called Grandstanding, where they talk about something similar. They said basically, like, if you read online discourse, everyone on the, all the Democrats think that all the Republicans are racist Trump supporters, and all the Republicans think all the Democrats are gay. Like that there's just that's it. There's only two options. And it's true. If you're only reading one perspective on everything, then that's going to impact your views. Islamically, it's the same thing. If you only read like one thing, and I don't want this to get misconstrued, right? There's a difference in someone who's like studying Islam and they're learning a particular method. That's different because that's a formal curriculum. I'm talking about just someone who's just hacking their way at any random issue online, right? Where you're going to just think everything is black and white. And the more that you go down those holes, the more convinced you are that you're correct and everyone else is wrong. And so I would say one is just recognizing that you have echo chambers. I think the other thing also is that when you see people becoming more and more polarizing in their discourse, there's a natural reaction to think that when someone is so confident in what they're saying that they must be right. I think we almost have to reprogram that and look at it that when someone is so confident that they're 100% right and they're getting more and more extreme, we should recognize that that person's in an echo chamber as opposed to really being that confident and correct. But it's a hard one to break, and it does require a lot of effort of following different types of people, getting different types of perspectives. I think this is one place where an offline component is really helpful, where having, look, here's a good example. When the media would say all Muslims are terrorists, what did we say? We said, well, come to our masjid and meet us, talk to us, get to know us. And we know that all the survey data said that people who knew a Muslim in their personal life had a much more favorable opinion versus someone that only watched Fox News. If someone only watches Fox News and has never met a Muslim, they will naturally conclude every Muslim is a terrorist, right? But people that work with them and know them, they know that that's not the case. And I would say that when we're looking at things online, it has to be complemented by offline discussions, like real discussions with people that you know, because otherwise you're only seeing caricatures of each other.
Yeah. And
so for people that are in echo chambers, for the most part, the consequence, at least for the individual, is that they have some sort of perception that they've arrived at like a level of truth, and that they're confident in the opinion that they hold, because so many people around them also agree with that particular opinion. And I recognize the fact that, like, if you take the action of really diversifying the amount of information that you take and like the amount of the different sort of like perspectives that you're able to like really converse with, that you might arrive to like different opinions. But like, I guess like how confident can we be that even like trying to like expand our like area of information would result in like arriving to like truth specifically? Because I see why echo chambers are so popular.
It's easy.
Yeah, it's easy. You like you're in. So many people are like confirming like what you think you know, and then like there you go, that's your truth. But I feel like the action item that you're suggesting, even though I agree with it, might result in to a point where some people may not be confident in the conviction that they have.
So I would almost turn that question back and say, why is there such a desire to arrive at the truth and the right position versus considering yourself a student of a subject and knowing and admitting that your views will constantly evolve?
Yeah. If you look through the lens of politics, like that definitely makes that question come back up, because we're pushed to make like stances so early in our lives, but we actually haven't navigated the issue. Number one, we probably had a lot of misinformation that we've digested and we don't know it. And number two, like there's no reason that you have to have a stance on every particular issue when you haven't researched it. So I think like that applies well there too.
Yeah, and that's a great action item to like when you said to like follow different outlets. But like for me, I was like, man, can I ever see myself like following Fox News? Like that's where I think like the actual advice to putting into practice. I mean, maybe Fox News is like, an extreme.
Yeah, I'll say it doesn't mean that you have to like. It doesn't mean that you have to follow Fox News all of a sudden, right? Or that if you're, I'm a Muslim, so now I have to follow an Islamophobe to balance out my echo chamber. Like that's not what that means. But it means find people who are respectable, right, and have something to offer. So no, I don't follow Fox News, but I will read what maybe a more intelligent conservative might have to say about things, where I don't disagree. I may disagree with them, but at least I can respect their thought process as to how they arrived at a particular conclusion.
So we have to look for nuance, essentially, right?
Yeah, you could, to use the buzzword. Yeah, it's looking for the nuance, but also just reading people that intelligently offer a differing viewpoint. And it's not going to be on everything, but at least on issues that are of importance to you.
And I may be wrong with this, but I feel like it's kind of harder to find those people because those aren't the outrage people that get famous and you see them.
Very much.
That's the thing.
You have to seek it out because, again, the ones that are the most polarizing become the most popular.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a great action item, but like for me, it's like obviously it'll take like more willpower and more like conscious effort
Yeah, I
But
think
like you mentioned, it's great. Yeah.
with a bit of humility, maybe it's possible. But I think
Yeah.
the moment you start to think you don't have an echo chamber, you've already lost, I think.
Yeah.
And I think also there's an element of like, how many issues are you expected to follow and gain expertise on? How
Yeah.
many issues do you have to have an opinion on? You know,
Mhm.
I understand that it's popular to have an opinion on a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that you have to.
Mm.
And so there might be a lot of things that people are talking about. They're like, oh, I really want to like dig into this because this is interesting. But then, you know, so what I do for myself is when I see like these really interesting discussions, I save everything to an app called Pocket, which is like a read later app, right? So I'll go save all these articles, like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and go through it. And I'll sit on it for a week and then I'll open up Pocket and look at it and be like, why do I care about this topic? Because once I revisit it after that social media hubbub has died down, and I go back and like, okay, let me revisit this and try to intelligently consume this information. I'm like, why do I even care?
Mhm.
And I just end up deleting them all out and never looking back at it again.
Yeah.
Dean, that's a good exercise for like even like activism, like spotting your true like compassion for a issue that's going on. Like if you actually want
Yeah.
to read about it later, that's really
So,
interesting.
We're going to be wrapping up the podcast soon, but before that, I wanted to like talk about a few things in reference to the book, the subject matter around the book, and also like I guess like how this specific topic has at least like gained a level of prominence over the last like few months for the most part, especially being in a pandemic. And before that, I wanted to ask Brother Mar, have you watched The Social Dilemma? And if you have, how did you like it?
I watched it. I felt it was a bit alarmist.
Mm.
Okay.
I think that it made some good points, and I think that there's definitely things in there to consider. But I felt that it did more to just stoke fear than actually giving people something tangibly to do.
Oh yeah, it didn't have any action items or for the most part. Yeah, because like it seemed like it was a sort of spotlight on the main person behind it. I'm forgetting his name, but like he runs that nonprofit, and like it seemed like it was like a major ad just around like his nonprofit for the most part.
I'll tell you the issue that I had with it was this. It was extremely alarmist, and this is where I feel the importance of having Islamic principles in these discussions is so important, right? Because this is where we have something to offer that the rest of the community doesn't. Which is, if you watch Social Dilemma, you're going to feel the sense of overwhelm, like, oh my God, the world is going to end. Because basically, you know, if things continue as they are, then no one is going to know what's truth and what's false, and everything that we do is owned by a corporation and blah blah, and essentially the sky is falling, right? Like that's the way that you feel when you're done with it. And I think from an Islamic perspective, it's more of Allah is in control, not Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. You know, like don't make this big. Yes, there are definitely like problems to be aware of and be cautious of, and like do things to fix that up. But in terms of that just overwhelming sense of, oh my God, this is just so horrible and there's no way to fix it, I don't find that to be a very healthy way of looking at it. And that was my primary issue with the film, because I think as Muslims we have to have a much more balanced perspective of, okay, yeah, there's clearly a cause for concern, but we also have an element of tawakkul that Allah is the one in control of society, not us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess a follow-up question to that is, so I agree with you in the sense that it was alarmist, but what I think was very interesting, at least from like the documentary getting prominence, was that it like this sort of subject matter on like the effects of social media and internet and like stuff like that is obviously becoming a concern, not just like, you know, for the Muslim community, but for like broadly
for everyone. Yeah.
Everyone, like generally. How confident are you in I guess both like the Muslim community itself, but even like broader than that, just generally, how confident are you in us being able to sort of like fix or like navigate or re-navigate like the issues that surround a lot of the things you talk in your book, and sort of like, I guess, like turn the tide a bit of being a little bit more like healthy when it comes to our social media usage or our internet usage?
I'm fairly confident, and I'll tell you why. Because the negative effects that we see all happen in a short amount of time.
Mm.
And there's no reason to think that it can't go the other way also in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Maybe it won't happen in a short amount of time. Maybe it'll happen a little bit longer, right? But the change was so fast that to me it indicates that it could also change in a different way as well. And I think part of it also is, and this is one thing that I really hope that the book accomplishes, is that it starts forcing these conversations where we're no longer just making fun of, aunties for forwarding crazy messages on WhatsApp, but maybe we have now language around how to talk about that and what, misinformation or false information looks like and how to spot it and how to think critically through those types of things. I hope, in the masjid, for example, again, it's moving beyond the conversations like look, when I would give talks sometimes, people would be like, can you please talk about Snapchat? And I'll be like, well, what do you want me to say about Snapchat? And they'd be like, can you please tell the kids to stop using it? And I was like, no, I'm not going to tell them to stop using it. I'm like, I probably agree with you in terms of why I think is bad for them and the way that they're using it. I probably agree with you, right? But me getting up on a mic at a masjid and saying kids stop using Snapchat is not going to change it. I think what will change it is families getting together and having a conversation around what is social media and how do we use that in a healthy way in our family. And for every family, this is going to be different, but I think the intentionality around how you use it and how you interact with it starts to make a lot of ripple effects of change. Because again, without the intentionality, it just by default, it does whatever it's been designed to do. And so you have to put the brakes on that approach in a different way. And then that starts to change it quite a bit. And look, let's look at some of the things that have changed a little bit for the better too. We went in the last 5 years from an age where people put their entire lives up on Facebook in public. Your every vacation you've been on, the inside of your home, pictures of your whole family, everything was public, 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 and anyone could go back and trace the last 5 years of your entire life. Then we saw things like Snapchat come in and make it normal to have disappearing messages, to post photos that disappear after 24 hours, and then you never go back to them. And so now, in a way, making things more private or sharing in a smaller circle has become more normal. We've gone from Twitter being a public group chat to the way that we interact with Twitter being much different, and the group chat now taking place on WhatsApp and not in the public realm, right? And so for me, those are more positive changes. And I think that with effort, we can have more. But yeah, it requires some conversation, it requires some work. But I think that that's very doable.
Yeah, so going off of that, I mean, all of us, I think, really enjoyed like reading your book and like learning about kind of your take on some of these issues that are very, very relevant right now, whether many of us want to reflect on them or not. What would you say are your next steps from here? Like, do you think you're going to go spend more time, teaching this book at places, like more seminars? Or is there like anything else you want to write about? Like, what are your next steps?
Next step is, I think I'm already working on the next book, inshallah, but it's going to be a different topic. So this one, I'll probably do a few more interviews and things like that. But in terms of teaching, I'll probably want to shift. Actually, quite honestly, before the pandemic started, I had already shifted into doing leadership training at Masajid and doing some work around that. So that's the next thing that I'm working on. The 2020 kind of put a, sorry?
Doing that with Oak Tree right now or just personally? Are you doing it with Oak Tree right now or just personally?
No, just doing it personally right now. But that's kind of the next thing. So Fiqh of Social Media, I'm hoping the book is kind of usually people write a book to kickstart something. For me, I'm hoping this is the book is the winding down of this project, inshallah, and then on to something else.
I heard a rumor, and maybe you can confirm this rumor, but I heard a rumor that you're writing a book with Sheikh Hasib on leadership.
I've talked to him about it, but nothing formal.
Okay. That would be a really awesome book. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, Brother Umar, I mean, I'll let him plug it, but his podcast and his writing is very like something you probably have not seen before. In terms of like, there's even like a article on an Islamic self-development framework. There's a lot of things like on productivity or even like building your own Shura council. So I would definitely recommend, as someone who's personally benefited from it, checking him out. But I had a question: why did you choose Ibn Abi Umar? Because we had Tariq on, like a couple episodes ago, and like I know you probably chose it before him, so he copied you. But why Ibn Abi Umar?
Because I was reading so I'll backtrack a bit because I don't want to make myself sound too nerdy here. My local masjid that I grew up in had a very big issue with hadith rejection. And so one of the first rabbit holes I ever went down was this idea of the authority of the sunnah and stuff. So probably before I could tell you like whether or not I'm praying properly, I was learning like the intricacies of like how hadith were verified and stuff, right? So it was like kind of the geeky thing. But in one of those books by Mustafa Azami, he mentioned that there was, he was talking about different narrators and stuff, but one of the narrators that's, in some chains in some books was Ibn Abi Umar. And I was like, oh, that's perfect because technically my dad is Abu Umar since I'm the oldest. So that's like the perfect little nickname. So I just picked that and stuck with it.
That's the exact answer I thought I gave, actually.
A circular name.
Yeah.
It's a circular name. I didn't want to just use my full name and whatnot. So
Awesome.
Yeah. And so where can people find you at that name and everything, or is there other
it's
places?
that name on everything. So ibnabiumar.com. And then Ibn Abi Umar is also the name of the podcast, and social media is all on that handle.
Yeah. And everyone listening, please purchase and read this amazing book. I was gonna ask, so like, how do you make someone read this book? Because like, I feel like people should read it, but that's probably a different conversation.
Yeah, we'll plug it. We'll plug it on Instagram, inshallah.
It's gonna be in the show notes. So a direct link to the Amazon. It's gonna be on the show notes. And then we'll have a link in the description, and actually within our link tree as well. For anyone that's listening right now that wants to purchase the book, inshallah.
Inshallah.
But with that, we'll go ahead and conclude, and then again, listen to this. This is gonna be the joke of the podcast: is that we have this awkward, like
at least it's a staple though. Like people remember it.
Like awkward, really generic music that will.
Hey, it's your branding, so stick with it, man.
See, this is why Brother Umar was the right guest to have.
But yes, Jazakallah khair for your time. We really appreciated having.
Jazakallah khair for having me on. This was a great conversation.
All right, everyone, and here's the awkward music.